Hey Reddit, throwaway account because honestly, even 2 years later, talking about this still feels raw. 42M, let's call myself Mark, went through something absolutely blindsiding with my wife, let's call her Emily, 38F. For years, our marriage was complicated. Emily was emotionally intense. That's probably the most diplomatic way to put it. There were constant outbursts, dramatic reactions to minor things, and a level of manipulation that, looking back, I should have seen more clearly. But I loved her, and I genuinely believed that beneath the chaos, there was a real connection. I thought we were stable, in our own imperfect way. Our 10th anniversary was coming up, and despite the ups and downs, I was actually looking forward to celebrating a decade together. Boy, was I wrong. Emily loved a party. So, for our 10th anniversary, I threw her a big one. We had friends, family, the whole shebang. It was at a nice venue, good food, music, everything she had wanted. Throughout the evening, Emily seemed off. More giddy than usual, almost manic. She was flitting around, talking loudly, and there were a few moments where her laughter seemed a little too forced. I chalked it up to her being excited and maybe a little too much champagne. Then came the speeches. My best man gave a heartfelt, and slightly embarrassing, toast. My sister said some lovely things. When it was Emily's turn, I stood there, a little nervous but mostly proud. I expected the usual sentimental words, a thank you to our guests, maybe a loving nod to our journey together. What I got was a nuclear bomb dropped right in the middle of our celebration. She took the microphone, her eyes bright and a strange, almost triumphant smile on her face. The room quieted, everyone expectant. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice a little too loud. Mark and I, well, we've had a journey, haven't we? A nervous chuckle rippled through the crowd. I squeezed her hand, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Then she dropped the bomb. But tonight, she announced, her voice suddenly clear and sharp, tonight marks a new beginning for me. Because I'm leaving Mark. The room went silent. Utterly, completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. My hand, still holding hers, went cold. I stared at her, my mind refusing to process the words I had just heard. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. But she wasn't finished. She continued, her voice ringing through the stunned silence. I'm leaving him, she repeated, her gaze sweeping across the shocked faces of our friends and family, for David. My boss, David. A collective gasp went through the room. David was there, standing near the bar with his wife, Sarah, ironically. His face went white. Emily then delivered the final, devastating blow. David can give me what I truly want, she declared, her eyes locking onto mine with a chilling lack of emotion. He can give me a child. The air in the room crackled with disbelief and horror. Everyone knew about our recent struggles with fertility. The months of tests, the disappointment, the quiet grief we had shared, or so I thought. To throw that in my face, publicly, like this, it was an act of unimaginable cruelty. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Our friends and family were stunned, their faces a mixture of shock, anger, and pity directed at me. David's wife, Sarah, burst into tears and stormed out. Emily's own parents, who had always been somewhat wary of her dramatic tendencies but had always stood by her, looked at her with an expression I had never seen before, utter disgust. Her mother, her voice trembling with fury, walked up to Emily and, in a voice that carried through the stunned silence, said, "You are no longer my daughter." Her father stood beside her, his face a mask of disappointment. They turned and walked out, followed by several of Emily's siblings. Emily stood there, seemingly unfazed by the carnage she had just unleashed. She looked at me, a strange, almost defiant glint in her eyes, as if daring me to react. I just stared back, numb, the humiliation washing over me in icy waves. I don't remember much of the rest of the night. Friends helped me usher the remaining guests out. My sister stayed with me, her hand a comforting presence on my arm as I tried to make sense of the incomprehensible. The next morning, the reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. The woman I had spent a decade with, the woman I had loved and supported through countless emotional storms, had not only betrayed me but had done so in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. And she had used our deepest pain, our struggle to conceive, as a weapon. I didn't hesitate. I contacted a lawyer that very day and initiated divorce proceedings. Update 1. The initial days after the anniversary party were a blur of legal consultations, tearful phone calls with friends, and the crushing weight of an empty apartment. The silence where Emily's dramatic outbursts and constant demands had once filled the air was almost deafening. It was a strange kind of peace, but one tinged with a profound sadness. My lawyer, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Ms. Evans, was incredibly supportive. When I recounted the events of the anniversary party and the subsequent revelation of Emily's affair with her boss, she didn't bat an eye. She had seen it all before, she said, though even she admitted the public nature of the announcement was unique. The divorce proceedings moved swiftly. Emily, initially defiant and seemingly expecting a fight, quickly found her demands collapsing under legal scrutiny. Her claims for a significant portion of my assets, built long before she came into my life, held little weight. The public nature of her betrayal also didn't exactly garner her sympathy from the legal system. What was surprising was the complete and utter silence from Emily's family. Her parents and siblings stood by their pronouncement at the party. They didn't reach out to her, didn't offer support. It was as if she had ceased to exist in their eyes. Even mutual friends who had initially tried to remain neutral eventually sided with me, horrified by Emily's actions. Emily, isolated and facing the legal and social consequences of her choices, did try to reach out to me a few times. Her messages were a mix of anger, self-pity, and attempts to justify her actions. She accused me of not giving her what she needed, of being emotionally unavailable, a cruel irony, considering the years I had spent navigating her emotional roller coaster. She even tried to paint herself as the victim, claiming she had been unhappy for a long time. I didn't respond. Ms. Evans advised me to keep all communication strictly through her, and I followed her advice. I had nothing left to say to Emily. The woman I thought I knew had revealed a level of cruelty and selfishness I couldn't reconcile with the person I had loved. The divorce was finalized within a few months. It was a relatively clean break, legally speaking. Emily received what she was legally entitled to, which was far less than she had initially demanded. The emotional fallout, however, was a different story. The humiliation of her public announcement lingered, a shadow over my interactions with people. The pain of her betrayal, particularly the callous way she weaponized our fertility struggles, was a deep wound that took time to even begin to heal. In the immediate aftermath, I leaned heavily on my sister and a few close friends. They provided a safe space for me to vent, to cry, to rage. They reminded me of my worth, of the life I had built before Emily, and of the future that still lay ahead. The peace in my apartment, now devoid of Emily's emotional storms, was slowly starting to feel less like a void and more like a sanctuary. Update 2. It's been 2 years since that catastrophic anniversary party. 2 years since my life was ripped apart and then, slowly, painstakingly, pieced back together. Looking back now, it feels like a lifetime ago, yet the memory of Emily's words, the stunned silence of the room, the look of utter betrayal on my parents-in-law's faces, it's all still vivid. The healing process wasn't linear. There were days filled with a quiet sense of progress, where I felt like I was finally moving on. Then there would be unexpected triggers, a song, a place we used to frequent, a casual mention of anniversaries, that would send me spiraling back into the pain and humiliation. But slowly, gradually, the good days started to outnumber the bad. The sharp edges of the grief began to soften. The constant need to understand why Emily did what she did began to fade, replaced by an acceptance that some questions simply don't have satisfying answers. I focused on myself. I rediscovered hobbies I had neglected during the years of navigating Emily's emotional landscape. I spent more time with friends and family, strengthening those bonds that had sometimes felt strained by the constant undercurrent of tension in my marriage. I even started dating again, tentatively at first, terrified of repeating past mistakes. It wasn't easy. There were awkward first dates, moments of vulnerability, and the constant fear of being hurt again. But with time, I met someone kind, someone who appreciated my quiet nature and didn't thrive on drama. Her name is Anna, and she's brought a sense of calm and genuine connection into my life that I hadn't realized I was missing. Looking back at my marriage with Emily, I can see the patterns more clearly now. The constant need for attention, the manipulation disguised as emotional intensity, the way her needs always seemed to eclipse mine. I realize now that what I mistook for stability was actually a carefully constructed facade, built on my constant efforts to keep the peace. Emily's public announcement, as horrific and humiliating as it was, ultimately served as a brutal but necessary catalyst. It forced me to confront the reality of our broken marriage and freed me from the emotional chaos that had defined so many years of my life. The swift and decisive rejection from her own family, while shocking, spoke volumes about the true nature of her actions. I haven't heard from Emily directly in over a year. Mutual acquaintances have offered snippets of information, that her relationship with David didn't last, that she faced significant social repercussions for her behavior. But honestly, I don't dwell on it. My focus is on the present and the future I am building for myself, a future filled with genuine connection, mutual respect, and a quiet sense of peace that I never knew during my marriage with Emily. The scars remain, a reminder of the pain I endured. But they no longer define me. I have learned that resilience isn't about forgetting the past, but about growing stronger because of it. I have found peace in the quiet, a peace that was impossible amidst the storm of Emily's emotional volatility. And while the 10th anniversary will forever be etched in my memory as a moment of profound betrayal, it also marks the beginning of my journey towards a life finally lived on my own terms, a life filled with a quiet, steady happiness I never thought possible.